Okay, so here we are once more. This has taken on for me a kind of a silver linings thing, if you will, and to draw the parallel. If you don't know this, or if you do know, it doesn't really matter, except that I have a motorcycle. And living up here in Duluth, I get to ride for about 6 months. And on the edges of those 6 months, the temperatures can be a little bit less than fun. But still, it's a wonderful thing, but it's 6 months at best, pretty much. And so the trick with that, when I lived in Nashville, Tennessee, I could ride for 10 months out of the year, and I would put the bike away around Christmas, and by the middle of February, I could get the bike out again, and the temperatures were like pretty nice and pretty, but I wasn't crazed. I wasn't chomping at the bit for like months at a time, waiting for this opportunity that would allow me to actually get out on the bike. Up here, I would get out on the bike if it was like 45 degrees and I'd be riding, and people would say, "Oh, you gotta be crazy." And I would say, "Yes, I have waited so long, I have to do this, I have to do this." To a very real extent, we have been living through this sort of thing with COVID-ness, if you will. COVID appeared and everything stopped, and we went through a time where we weren't able to do this. We weren't able to have this experience of hearing this music, of coming out to concerts and that sort of stuff. And to a very real extent, we missed it. And the longer it went, the more crazed we became, because we were wanting this to happen. And it wasn't happening. The end result of all of this is that eventually, because orchestras, when they put together a season, when they put together a concert, they're always asking the question, will people come to hear stuff they know, or will they want to be challenged, or they want to hear something new? And there's always this dichotomy. And so you'll have people who won't come to the concert unless it's like Beethoven's Ninth or something. And others who won't come if it is a popular piece. So, but this COVID thing has made us have to change our way of looking at things, because suddenly, you know, the idea that beggars can't be choosers. We want this so badly that we don't worry about picking and choosing what concerts we will go to and what ones we won't, because we just want to go to them. This is one of the cool things about this. We've been made crazed because of absence, making the heart grow fonder, if you will. So, orchestras are dealing with the same thing. We have with the COVID protocols, where we have to stay distant, like 6 feet apart from each other, and or if you go shopping to the grocery store, and they'll have the design, and you have to stay 2 grocery carts apart. And I get to see that on the stage, 2 grocery carts in Waverly. Never mind. The point that I'm getting at is, so because they have to be 6 feet apart, suddenly you can't have as big an orchestra on there. So you'll have like half the string section, and suddenly this is a different animal. This is an animal that cannot make the noise of a full-sized romantic symphony orchestra. And as such, different stuff can happen. Before this, there are musicologists who would tell you that a large romantic symphony orchestra should not be doing the works of Haydn and Mozart and even Beethoven because your sound is too big, it's too lush, it's too full. And so they made it sound like there's this unwritten law that you can't do Mozart and Haydn with a full-size symphony orchestra. However, you will notice that over the course of the spring, this orchestra has done Haydn and Mozart. And in part, the reason for doing that is because Haydn and Mozart used a smaller orchestra. And so therefore, suddenly it's perfect for this size ensemble. And all of a sudden, we get to hear these works that under normal circumstances we wouldn't get to hear and haven't gotten to hear. The smaller orchestras make Haydn and Mozart available. And so here we are today, and the largest work on this program is actually Mozart's Clarinet Concerto, which was written only a couple months before he died. It was written for a friend of his named Anton Stadler. The clarinet was a very new instrument at the time. There weren't a lot of concertos, there wasn't a lot of music written for the clarinet because it had only been around since the early 1700s. And even at that, it was originally called a chalumeau, and it was a much different instrument and not nearly so facile. Eventually, the clarinet developed, and a lot of people like Karl Stamitz, for instance, a contemporary of Mozart, wrote a number of clarinet concertos. And just a curious aside, Mozart thought that Stamitz drank too much. So it's just interesting, and particularly the pot calling the kettle black when you know the story about Mozart. But be that as it may, so there were clarinet players who were really facile and really virtuosic and would really show off. And Anton Stadler wasn't one of those. He wasn't a wild virtuoso. He was much more involved with the idea of tone. Tone was really important to him. And he particularly enjoyed making sounds of low notes on his clarinet, and in fact had an extension that he could put on his clarinet to actually give him a third lower than what the clarinet normally would have. And originally, when Mozart wrote this concerto for him, he wrote it with the idea that he would be able to play these lower notes. Ultimately, the music got lost, and then it got picked up and put back together and stuff like that, and people weren't quite sure how it was done, how Stadler did this. But the fact of the matter is, so everybody has to come to terms with how they want to play this, how the instrument is supposed to go. But it's been described as sublimely beautiful. This piece, it isn't a show-off piece. It's not so much virtuoso, but it's very beautiful. Particularly the second movement is remarkably beautiful. And so Mozart wrote this for this friend of his, and then proceeded to die. And but it is up until the early 20th century, this was the most significant clarinet concerto for the orchestra. The next thing we have is Beethoven's Leonora number 3, Leonora Overture number 3, written in 1807. This Beethoven was writing an opera that ultimately was called Fidelio, but for an extended extended period of time. The opera was called Leonora, and he wrote ultimately a total of 5 different Leonora overtures. Some of them, a couple of them are lost or in pieces, but 1, 2, and 3, though they weren't written in that order, but 3 is the one that is most often done. And it is not usually done in conjunction with the opera. This was one of the things that was very curious. Ultimately, he wrote a Fidelio overture that he tacked on the front of Fidelio, and that's what we always hear when we hear that opera. The problem with Leonora overtures, and particularly Leonora number 3, is that it isn't so much an overture, but it's a tone poem. It tells you the story, the whole story of Fidelio, and it grabs all sorts of motifs and stuff, and really makes it's a very involving thing. To a certain extent, an overture, the best laid plans of mice and men with regard to overtures is that it's like a relay. It is like, this is the music that gets you going and brings you into this, and hands you the baton, and you continue from there with the opera. And to a very real extent, by the time you get done with Leonora, the 3rd Leonora overture, you're exhausted. And you've heard the whole thing now, and it's just sort of like, it doesn't, you want to have a cigarette for crying out loud. You don't want to, you're not wired about the opera so much. So it's a curious thing, because it stands by itself as a piece. When we did Fidelio here in Duluth with this little opera company, the Note that we had formed in the 1990s, when we did Fidelio, we did what is often done. We did Leonora 3 before the last scene, the last very sort of triumphant scene at the end. And this was something that Gustav Mahler did in his performances, and a lot of people have done. There are many people who complain that it doesn't really work, it doesn't need to be there. But the fact of the matter is, harmonically it does work. Harmonically it works very easily and very well. And the problem is, there is a scene change that has to happen, and you have no time. You can't just go from the dungeon to the courtyard just like that. And you can't maintain the audience while you take 10 or 15 minutes to change the scene. So it works out really well to do this overture at that point, as far as the logistical stuff is concerned. But anyhow, it is a piece that stands by itself, like I say, a virtual tone poem telling the story of Fidelio, a hero opera, if you will, a rescue opera, where a woman, her husband has been imprisoned, and she goes to all sorts of wild and extravagant business in order to free him. It's a very wonderful opera, a very powerful opera. So we are able to suddenly hear this music that is considered kind of early music for a full orchestra, but because we don't have a full orchestra, now the orchestra, the symphony is able to make some choices that it wouldn't have made before. Interesting stuff. Now we arrive after Beethoven. We would arrive at a point where here we are with the rich, full, romantic orchestra stuff, because this is symphony orchestra was in its heyday, and where there are composers and there are musical scholars who will tell you that the orchestra was a 19th century idiom, and that it doesn't really fit the 20th century. And anybody who is writing orchestral music in the 20th century is really writing 19th century music in the 20th century and shouldn't be taken seriously, yada, yada, yada. But the fact of the matter is that when you cut out a significant portion of the strings, you are invited suddenly into the area of music for the 20th century. Music particularly that is not full orchestra, but is rather the orchestra, the chamber orchestra kind of thing. And there were a lot of people who did this. One of the quotes that I always like to use is Arnold Schoenberg, when he was younger, and he was trying to make his mark in musical mark, and he said, you know, I can double the size of a Mahler orchestra, and he says it still just sounds like Mahler. That the only way to make sense for him to make his mark was to pull back, to make the orchestra smaller. And this then became really the 20th century hallmark, is the idea of smaller, more defined instrumental ensembles. And so we have the next piece is by Darius Milhaud. And Milhaud is such an interesting human being. Born in 1892, died in 1974. So he hung around for quite a while and was writing constantly. And he was a very intellectual man. He wrote 2 string quartets, his 12th and his 13th, I believe, that work by themselves as separate pieces of music. And there are also the 2 bits that, when put together, creates his string octet. So you can play these 2 string quartets separately, or you can play them together, and they function. This Milhaud did not sound German. He was not a Wagnerian. He was not impressionistic, however. There are people who seem to think that if you're French and you didn't want to sound German, then you had to embrace impressionism, like Debussy and Ravel. And he did not embrace that, nor did he embrace expressionism. It was more intense colors, more intense stuff. He did not embrace 12-tone. And to a certain extent, to take me kind of out of the realm, some of my favorite record albums are ones that Phil Spector had nothing to do with, because Phil Spector had created this wall of sound, which was this ability to create this noise that sort of encompassed everything, and it made everything sound larger than life, kind of in a Wagnerian sort of way. And that isn't Milhaud. Milhaud is very clear. He is very transparent. Milhaud works with the idea of polytonality, the idea that you have more than one. That for instance, if one instrument is playing in C major, another one is playing in E flat minor, and you have these melodies that are crossing, that are intersection, but they don't touch the same stones. It's an interesting situation. that is very much fun. And he was also influenced a lot by American jazz, yet he didn't imitate American jazz. He just saw American jazz as a means of freeing himself up. And he was very influenced by all sorts of different folk musics and musics of the world. He is a very open-minded man, and essentially he would, if he heard something he liked, he would play with that concept. He would work that into stuff, and so a very intelligent human being. While he was vacationing in Brazil, he heard, I believe it was a tango called Le Boeuf sur le Toit, which was the bull on the roof, the beef on the roof, the cow on the roof, whatever it was. It was a bovine situation where the house was underneath it. And he was putting this together, and he had visions of, he said, of a carnival in Rio de Janeiro, and or a speakeasy in New York City, because this piece was written around 1919, which was when Prohibition happened, and it didn't mean that people weren't drinking. It meant that they were just partying in secret. And there was Jean Cocteau took this work and turned it into a stage piece that included people hanging out in a speakeasy in New York City. When a policeman comes in and they turn themselves instantly into what they call a milk bar rather than a bar per se. And this policeman comes in and ends up being beheaded by a ceiling fan, and then everybody drinks and parties, and then when they're done, then somehow the policeman is revived. How you revive somebody who's been beheaded, I haven't a clue, but nonetheless, he is revived so that he can be given the bill after it's all over. This story kind of thing, was it what Milhaud was thinking? Probably not. But he was enjoying the noise that he was presenting. And the idea of a carnival in Rio de Janeiro is very real, I think, in his approach here. He also talked about, in describing this, he talked about copious amounts of absinthe needed to happen in order for this to really work. Absinthe being a particular French liqueur that was a really popular drink for the French, particularly people like Toulouse-Lautrec or Baudelaire. And Milhaud's students, he had some very interesting students, very famous students. Dave Brubeck, the jazz pianist, and Burt Bacharach, who wrote all sorts of American popular songs. They both studied with him. They don't sound like him. What he gave them was the freedom to do what was important to them. Don't be afraid that you're going to write a melody that is too easily accessible. Just never fear a contagious melody. Always realize that if it's going to work, it's going to work. And the idea of not apologizing for writing something that people like. I think you will find the Boeuf sur la Toit. This is a very, very much fun piece, a very colorful piece. Like I say, it is very transparent, and you get to hear lots of different sounds, and it's really, really a remarkable thing. Ultimately, then we have two other pieces. One piece, curiously, written by a man Yusufi, it's called Freedom. Yusufi was born in Afghanistan in 1995. Afghanistan, under the Taliban, music was completely banned under the Taliban. And the idea that when the Taliban was defeated originally in 2001, these people, suddenly music came to the fore. Music happened, plus also we had suddenly women could go out, women could work, they could have jobs, they could have occupations. This is very important. The idea of freedom, the idea that you can express who you are, what life is like, what your heart is saying, and send it out into the world, particularly at a time right now where the United States is leaving Afghanistan and people are very afraid of what's going to be left there. This is a very, very, in many ways, kind of quietly important piece of music. It's only 4 minutes long, and he does embrace his own music from Afghanistan, but also American popular music is visible in this. This is something that just happens with the American musical establishment does touch lots of people all over the world, and I think it's important for us to just realize that it is there, that the way that the world is right now, there more and more of American popular culture goes out there easily, and it is likable. People like it, people enjoy it, and they will grab onto it. And the other piece, written by Osvaldo Golyov, who was born in 1960 in Argentina, and it is called Zizi's Dream. Oh, and give me a chance here. Once Zhuang Zhu, who is Zizi, he dreams that he's a butterfly flitting around and he's happy, and then he wakes up, and he doesn't know if when he wakes up, if he is in fact Zhuang Zhu, or if he is in fact the butterfly. This is very much a rhapsodic kind of piece of music. It is very charming. It is very beautiful. It has hints of impressionism in it that happens when you musically try to create essentially this dreamlike state. For those of you who are familiar with it, one of the things, there's a piece of music by Shostakovich, his second piano concerto, the middle movement. This reminds me so much of that, in part just because it is so beautiful, just because it is so very beautiful. But the part of what Golyov is dealing with here is the essence of Tao, T-A-O, Tao. It is a concept, a Chinese concept. It is kind of hard to describe, kind of like Sisu. Is we know what it means, but we can't describe it. Tao is sort of this essence that life is and that we are. I had a brief moment where I thought I was intelligent, and I have read any number of books. There was Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Zen in the Art of Archery, Zen in the Art of Driving, and all of these things. What happened was, because there are times, when I was in church and not necessarily, the sermon wasn't bringing me along. And so I started just writing down things and wrote down the first letter of each word. And I discovered that the art of anything is T-A-O. It's Tao. And that, you can say that it's not meaningful, that it's nothing. And yes, because it's in English and Tao is a Chinese thing and there would be no cross-pollination or anything. But yet, by the same token, it is essentially, Tao is the art of life, the art of everything. It is the business of who we are. And here we are, finishing a season with the symphony orchestra and this has happened because it was important. Because people needed this to happen. They wanted this to happen. They had gone without it for months. And suddenly when it was offered again and offered in a very realistic and wonderful way, this is exciting. This is very exciting. And I hope that it will continue to develop and continue to work, and that we will remember particularly this spring, this music that happened this spring. We will remember it really fondly. And ultimately, so I just leave you, there is this Tao of music, this Tao of singing, the art of being human, if you will. And am I me, or am I the butterfly looking at me? Am I the center of the universe, or am I that star out in the distance that's looking toward the center and seeing all sorts of other stuff? Or ultimately, do I make my motorcycle sexy, or am I sexy because I'm on a motorcycle? Enjoy yourselves. This is wonderful stuff, and I look forward to doing this some more. Thank you very, very much.